So if the commercial returns are there, alongside clear, deep, enduring social and environmental value, will unlock a lot more capital. People will aspire to be entrepreneurs. And that was sort of the big idea.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker here today with another episode of the Mission Driven Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm trying to inspire, equip, and engage the aspiring mission-driven entrepreneurs around the world as they pick up a tool set and try and figure out how can they solve one of the big challenges they see. With this episode, I'm extremely excited to be joined by Steve Beck, who's the co-founder and managing director of Novastar Ventures. Novastar Ventures is one of the largest global VCs operating in entrepreneurial Africa, and they back bold entrepreneurs who are forging innovative solutions to the continent's biggest problems. And through their work over the last decade, they've developed a great portfolio that covers a spectrum of different activities, issues, entrepreneurs, and geographies. And so with that, Steve, it's really great to have you here with us on the Mission Driven Podcast to talk about the work that you and your team have been doing over the last decade plus now through Novastar, but also just in generally through the work that you've been doing, the entrepreneurs that you've been identifying, investing into, and mentoring along their path to scale.
Thanks, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So as a starting point, would you mind introducing yourself and the mission that you're on?
Yeah, so I'm Steve Beck, as advertised. I'm a co-founder managing partner of Novastar. I grew up in the Bay Area, in the Silicon Valley, as they say. It was probably more fruit tree orchards than Silicon when I was a little kid there. And I spent 20 years in strategy consulting, helping chief executives of Fortune 200 companies decide where to play and how to win. But I had done a PhD in development economics, and I suppose I had this in the back of my mind or in my heartbeat to do something in the global South that was related to development. I had an opportunity to work with some visionary investors who were wanting to apply investment discipline to their grant making. And they were talking about setting up a philanthropic investment bank. And I know that sounds potentially like a triple oxymoron, but the idea was to apply investment discipline to their grant making. Where would the marginal dollar make the biggest sort of life change difference? And it was fascinating. And it had me traveling a lot to East Africa. And while I was there, I noticed interesting for-profit ventures that I thought, wow, if these are successful, they will have a more sustainable and therefore more scalable impact on poverty and its effects. I got infected with that idea. I left Geneva Global, started investing my own money, clubbing together with others to see if this idea had legs. Yeah, and we created a model portfolio, I guess a kind of proof of concept portfolio. And so that's sort of a little bit of my story interwoven with the Novastar story.
What was it at the time that catalyzed you to jump out of the work that you were doing, the career you'd built, the success that you'd achieved, into this new space?
Yeah, I suppose look, I don't like the language of, success to significance or, I want to give back or a sort of karma job. That's not the way I was thinking about it. I thought what I was doing in consulting was meaningful work. We were, it was a lot of people work as well as analysis. And I ended up running 2 consulting firms. So I was responsible for sort of 1,500 employees. And so it was a deeply engaging and meaningful job. But I suppose what I was looking for was to connect more this sort of heart call that I had into with the global South. I'd spent time there kind of doing my PhD, had spent time volunteering, and was really looking for a way to combine my professional experience with the outcome of my work be, helping a successful business increase their ROE to cost of equity, increase shareholder value. Or could I engage this professional experience into something that I felt was more aligned with my sort of heart life calling?
The medium, in a way, sounds like what we hear about, let's say, blended finance now, where you're looking for a different way to invest for a higher return. Not many people were talking about that. Now it's very common. But what were some of the early questions you were trying to either ask and answer, or things that you were onto that you knew needed to be fundamentally changed in those early days?
Yeah, I think I've been spending, as I say, a lot of time in East Africa, particularly. So Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Rwanda. We were managing these grant programs, but I did see some interesting for-profit ventures. And I think that the thing that I was sort of feeling for, or was not proven, was could you back a business that was actually commercially really interesting, that a business that could scale by solving problems for everyday consumers? And it's all very well to think, well, maybe I could find one, maybe I could find 2. Like, can you find enough to support a fund And then could you find enough to support an asset class, right? And so that was sort of like the stepping stones that we were going through. We've now invested in 25 companies across a couple of funds, and the asset class is growing around us. But that clearly in 2007, 2008, we were just sort of finding our way in the dark, to be honest.
2008, you're finding your way in the dark. You make a few investments. 2011, 12, you bring a partner in, or you align with a partner, and now you have Novastar Ventures. So can you introduce the work that you, like the fund itself as it is now? You mentioned the 25 investments, but what is the organization? How many people are involved? How has it changed since you were an amateur finding your way through the dark into something that is really, developing an asset class and developing, a proof of concept that others can follow?
Yeah. I mean, so we're managing, $200 million across two funds and a co-investment facility now. So we've got offices in Nairobi and Lagos, so two of the most dynamic entrepreneurial ecosystems on the continent. And I'm here in London. We've got an office here as well. We've backed 25 companies through those two funds. Similar thesis for both of those funds. So, like I was saying before, this is an extension of sort of that finding my way in the dark journey. It was really looking for businesses that were solving big problems for big markets, and in a sense, we thought there was a nice alignment between commercial venture capital in Africa and a kind of, if I can call it, an impact motivation. So we had to find businesses that were solving real world problems for the mass market, for what we call the many, the everyday consumer, producer, supplier. Do so with a commercial sensibility whereby the social and environmental value will arise naturally as a consequence of the commercial growth. So we're always looking for, is there that positive, unambiguous positive correlation between the way in which the planet or in the way in which everyday consumers and producers will their lives will be improved through the commercial growth of the businesses. So if the commercial returns are there, alongside clear, deep, enduring social and environmental value will unlock a lot more capital. People will aspire to be entrepreneurs rather than aspiring to sit in a white SUV working for an NGO or multilateral in Africa. And that was sort of the big idea. Could we catalyze an asset class?
Traditional VC, impact investor, where do you think that you fall on the spectrum of those two things? Where do you think that you are? And then are you trying, like you kind of mentioned, like you're trying to catalyze or normalize this asset class, but are you in a way normalizing impact at the same time?
So, we fundamentally believe that the most valuable companies in the world are those solving humanity's biggest problems. Now, let's be honest, those aren't always the companies that are the most valuable in the eyes of the capital markets. But in a sense, we're trying to bridge the gap, at least in the African markets where we operate. And as I was saying before, we feel like in Africa, there is that nice alignment between a commercial VC, which we are, and an impact motivation. I get a little bit concerned about the labels of impact because it's come to mean something different to everybody. And so that's why we tend to use this language of, we're looking for inclusive value. We're really looking for businesses that are great commercial opportunities because they're solving problems for lots and lots of everyday consumers on the continent. And that means, think about what those consumers are spending their time and money on. They're spending them on education, healthcare, food, housing. Like if you're solving those problems for people, you're having massive impact. But we're trying to be careful not to get the cart before the horse.
How much time do you spend trying to understand the realities of the average person in the market that you are investing into? How important is it for you to understand that? And what's your process for understanding the real problems?
So we knew that we had to be close to the markets that we were serving. So Andrew and I both moved to Nairobi in 2014 as the fund was getting set up. But importantly, we've hired some phenomenal people who've grown up in Nigeria, who've grown up in Kenya, who understand the dynamics of some of the ways in which these markets work. And, yes, we can spend time studying and so on and building sort of market maps and landscape studies and hiring, economic research on kind of behavioral economics. But to be honest, our big learning is through our portfolio companies. We backed MoneyPoint, who's transformed itself from a kind of rapidly growing agency banking business in Nigeria to now an all-in-one payments banking operations platform for micro and small businesses. They're serving through those businesses now a quarter of Nigeria's population. Or Po Internet, we were talking about what people pay for data. This is now the fastest growing internet service provider on the continent of Africa, doubling year over year. And their secret sauce, they've got affordable, flexibly priced, unlimited bandwidth for that everyday consumer. And so we've learned our laboratory has been getting alongside these incredibly driven, tenacious entrepreneurs and walking that journey with them. And then, you start to get pattern recognition and you start to see things, coming around again, and you start to understand the dynamics of these markets. But I think all credit to the founders that we've worked with, because we've learned a tremendous amount from them.
And how are you identifying the founders or the growth stage, innovators that you're working with? And what do you look for in an idea? Like, what is it that when you're presented, you're like, okay, they understand, they have a model?
Well, look, we're often the first institutional investor to back these companies or these entrepreneurs. So we can go in at seed stage. And at that stage, it's frankly all about the founders or the founding team. Because the only thing you know about the business plan is that the business plan is wrong. And so what really matters is the character, the capacity, the ambition, the tenacity of the entrepreneurial team. So anyway, that's sort of first, second, third, it's all about the team. The second thing for us is, are they addressing a big enough problem, a big enough pain point where they have the opportunity to build a big business? They need to have, to us, an understandable innovation. Rich, they're often not taking technology risks. They're not breaking new technology. They're applying existing technology to innovate a business model. And so that's sort of, do we understand that innovation, that business model innovation? And are we values aligned? Like, are we in it for the same reasons? Are they mission driven? We can't have people bailing out at the first speed bump, because they're going to be hitting brick walls. All these value chains are broken. They're going to have to be very tenacious and skillful. I think that would be better than the best entrepreneurs in the Silicon Valley, because there isn't the support system. There aren't the rails that they can run on. Those are the things that we're looking for. And we say no 99.5 times out of 100.
You mentioned they need to have the tenacity to get through these roadblocks. I would imagine that they have a much higher pain threshold than your average Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur. And I'm curious, is that what you're finding? And what are some of those signals that you've seen through your pattern recognition that say, like, okay, this individual, this team really has it together?
People talk a lot about finding product market fit or finding business model fit. But I think the thing that we pay a lot of attention to right up front is founder market fit. Like, do they understand their customers? Are they close to the customers? Do they really understand? Have they lived that? Have they lived the pain of their customers? Because if they have, that is that's something that will give them not only that sort of intuitive understanding about the market that they're seeking to serve, but they will have that grit, that tenacity to keep going, that agility to keep going. It's also, it is interesting to think about that. We're also quite wary about single founder risk. Most great companies have been built by founding teams. And that's in part because it's too hard there's too many things for one person, and it's too hard. And, I have a co-founder, right? There were times when we were raising our first fund where he's like feeling bullish and I'm going like, I want to give up. And, you kind of need each other to keep going as well. And so, I think looking at the founding team, but also then looking at the dynamics of that team, because that team is going to go through a crucible.
Yeah, I talk a lot about, I've founded multiple organizations on my own, and the ones that I've founded with co-founders or with a very strong number two, such a different experience. Like, not just in terms of the work and what I had to focus on, how many things I had to do, but also the people that you could enjoy it with, right? Like, when you're getting a small win behind your laptop and it's on your own, it's very different than when your number two is like, we just did it. And, you can get that energy in the office going. I regularly come back down to thinking to the groups that I started on my own, like, what would it have been like had I had an equal co-founder or a team of?
Yeah, and you have that joy, but you then also have the complexity of those that, you're no longer, you have people who say to you, well, Rich, you're wrong. If you're a single founder, you don't have anybody saying that to you. So I think it's, but I think it's absolutely essential, right? It's just too hard otherwise. I completely
when
agree.
You said that, the younger me was like, yeah, I would have fought back when someone said I was wrong. The older me is now thinking, that's valuable. Like, not to say you have to listen to every time someone says that, but if you learn to understand, like, when someone says that and how to really process that and look at what you're doing and maybe grow through it, that's also a sign of a more mature or more stable entrepreneur as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And it's probably another trait that I should mention is we we look for, obviously the founders got to have the courage of their conviction, otherwise they wouldn't be founding this crazy, kind of business to change the world. But they also have to have a humility, and often we take a sort of coaching role. We're not in the driver's seat. We're helping them build their business, right? We're minority investors, but we want to know that we can have the kind of the trusted relationship where they'll listen to us, and that's important because this is also a long-term relationship, right? We're often backing these businesses for 10 years, and so we need to know that we have that kind of trusted symbiotic relationship.
What were some of the early challenges that you faced as someone raising one of the earliest funds to bring it to scale? And then maybe what are some of the challenges that you face in identifying the right entrepreneurs at 0.05%, acceptability? It
was challenging because there wasn't a venture asset class. We were raising a venture fund, and we were told by experienced investors in Africa that we literally were told that venture would never work in Africa. That was like our meeting one, when you go with your pitch deck and it says a venture fund for Africa, and the first thing the person says is, we've been doing this for decades and venture will never work in Africa. The advantage we had is we had already made a number of investments. We already had, in a sense, a proof of concept to say, well, actually, that's an interesting presupposition, but let's talk about what we've already done. And so that, in a sense, disarmed or undermined that sort of a priori argument that says, well, this is crazy. Because we've been investing, we also had some deal flow. We had people who were starting to come to us for investment. Now, we were investing out of our own pockets, so we didn't have like a deep well to keep going. But we were, in a sense, inviting investors to come along the journey with us. We were going to do this with or without them. They could either capitalize a fund and accelerate it and expand it and help to catalyze what is now this $3.5 billion asset class, or they could sit on the sidelines. And in fact, by the time we got done raising Fund 1, we were oversubscribed. And so, there is this shift from kind of like skepticism to, okay, this looks interesting, to then FOMO. But, you still have to sort of prove it to your investors. This is a long journey. And we kept saying to them, you're going to have a cast iron constitution, because in venture, we're going to, the lemons ripen before the peaches. So we're going to see there's going to be some blood on the carpet. There's going to be some pain. There's going to be write-offs. And so we just need to be prepared for that. But the prize is worth going for. I think on the entrepreneur side, because you asked on that side as well. Look, I think the good news is that the deal flow has increased exponentially as the asset class has grown. There's some great entrepreneurial talent who grew up in Lagos, grew up in Nairobi. They got a scholarship. They went off and they went to MIT, and now they're like, all come back, and instead of coming back and either looking for a job with an NGO or with Safaricom, or they're coming back and they're maxing out their credit card to start a business, and they can do that because there is a venture capital kind of asset class around them. And we're at a point now in the ecosystem where we're starting to see second-time founders. So that's actually, I think, a really important milestone for the development of the ecosystem in Africa. We're seeing founders who, whether or not their first venture failed, in fact, it's better if it failed. And actually, paying attention to those women and men who've been through that bodes really well for the development of the ecosystem going forward.
Yeah, I lived in Silicon Valley in the late 90s, and I remember just like, why are they giving money to all these total, like 3, 4, 5th failures? And I realized, because they know how to be punched. They know, like, they don't get frazzled at the little things, and they iterate and they adjust. And yeah, it failed, but the idea is that they're coming back stronger. Which actually is to my next question, which is, all right, you have 25 current in your portfolio. How many total investments have you made? What has been the fail rate? And what are some like common lessons that you've learned through seeing some of those struggle, fail, like whatever brought it to its end? Like, what are some of the signals you've learned about, or what are some of the common traits that you see, and how have you improved your filter up front?
The first thing to say is we're multi-round investors. So when you say how many investments we've made something like probably 80 investments. But in multiple rounds, and we've invested in 25 companies. The failure rate that we sort of anticipated, that we advertised to our investors, has proven out. So, and when I say failure, I'm talking about kind of sort of complete write-off, complete zero. It's too early to tell out of Fund 2. We're not far enough in to tell. Right now, it looks like probably arguably not enough failures in that fund yet. So it's still it's still too early to call. But I think the key thing here is the learnings. And we've talked about some of them. I think really being much more nuanced about thinking about the founders, what is the kind of characteristic of a successful founder, paying a lot more attention up front to the team and the team dynamics and the roles of the team and where where those potential fault lines might lie in the future of the team, and sort of being alive to those, being alert to those. The other thing, which I think I would say we anticipated it because we saw it in some of our early investments before we launched Novastar, but is the need for these businesses to build end-to-end solutions. So we've become a lot more suspicious about companies and entrepreneurs that come to us saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to build this app, and this app is going to do, it's going to be asset light. It's going to be pretty quick. We're going to do this, and then we're going to kind of supply it. And so we're seeing the most successful, the most interesting businesses in our portfolios are those that are having to do that. And they are almost building vertically integrated businesses, stitching together the whole value chain, which they have to own or control much more of, and then being able to deliver that value reliably, deliver the whole end-to-end solution. So that takes more time. It takes more money. It entails more execution risk. But if you can do it, the interesting thing is what we're seeing is, in our space anyway, is once those companies kind of hit breakthrough velocity, if they kind of hit that inflection point and they've stitched all that together, their margins increase, and as they scale, their marginal costs are low. That makes life interesting. It makes it challenging. But then you're also then adding to your list of things the entrepreneur, the team have to have. They have to be real executors. They have to build for scale from day one, and it's not everybody who can do that.
Do you take a more active approach with your investors or with your entrepreneurs and your investments now as well? Like, I'm curious, have you found things that you can do outside the money, outside of just the catch-ups and the reports, that where you can really mentor them and help them along as well?
We're definitely not into kind of hand-holding. If we're hand-holding, then that's a bad investment. We should just stop. However, I think you're right in the sense that we are very active investors. So yes, we will take a minority stake in the business, but we'll almost always take a seat on the board. If it's an early stage business, we'll be wanting 10 board meetings a year. Like, we'll be wanting a regular cadence of check-ins so that we get attuned to what are the issues the company's facing, particularly in that sort of blueprinting stage where they're looking for product market fit or they're looking for business model fit. That's where some of the pattern recognition that we've had, we can bring that to bear. But it's not in a formal setting. It's in an informal setting, in those kind of weekly catch-ups and those monthly board check-ins. And oftentimes what we're doing is we're using our relationship capital. So we will know, if we know a supplier, we know someone who's got experience in technology, or we know another, they're always in the market for human capital. So as the business is scaling. But then importantly, we're all these businesses, we invest in the early stage, that money lasts for 18 months, say, and they're trying to hit milestones. They're going to need more capital. And so we're also, a lot of what we do is help them think about the capital strategy for the firm and to be a signal investor for later stage investors. So those are some of the key ways that we're adding value.
How do you kind of frame success for the work that you're doing as a signal investor and building an ecosystem for this, to prove this asset, to prove this model, or you can bridge these two things together, bring it to scale, succeed, to help kind of create the flywheel effect?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think I'll go back to what we were saying before about really seeking to catalyze a venture asset class. So while we can't take full credit for it, but we can say, well, okay, we've been at least catalytic in seeing that. Obviously, the other way to think about us as a signal investor is we track the amount of capital that follows us. So on average, about $7 gets invested in our companies for every dollar we put in. So it's an important metric for a number of reasons. One, it's not just okay, that's capital, but it says that actually it's also a kind of validating point for those companies, right? Others are looking at those same companies, it's not just beautiful in our eyes, but it's actually, the company's beautiful in the eyes of others. But the other thing we're doing, going back to the original thesis, is of course we, like any venture fund, we're looking at IRRs, we're looking at, multiple on invested capital, we're looking at, how the fund is performing financially. But we report to our investors in the same report, we report on a range of social and environmental value metrics as well, because that's also part of proving this thesis, right? Is it true that we can positively screen businesses who will derive significant social and environmental value from the commercial growth and success of those businesses?
Taking that out, it sounds like you're at a place where you could bring in traditional investors. And I'm curious, like, how close is it before they start to, before that, that goes from 2.5 billion, 250 billion to $2.5 trillion? Like, where are we on that spectrum?
Look, I think it's happening already. So I think I would say we're already seeing system level change in African VC over the last 10, or maybe even over the last 7 years, because I think that it was very lonely the first 3 years we were there. So let's start counting in 2017, 2018. And so that, 35x growth in 10 years, growing number of VC funds that have a dedicated African mandate, lots more accelerators on the continent, more seed, YCs doing stuff, more seed investors, larger PE players venturing down the capital ladder, sort of coming into the venture space. Development finance institutions who are a big part of the capital story in Africa. Now, many of them having dedicated venture teams. These were people who were saying venture wouldn't work in Africa. Like, they have dedicated venture teams now. So I think at a system level, we're seeing it. But I think there's this old adage that's we often as human beings overestimate what can be done in the short term and underestimate what is going to be the long-term impact. And I would just want to say that we need to be thinking in terms of decades, not in terms of quarters or years. And we're just getting started. We're really literally just getting started. Lots of green shoots, but we're getting started.
What's your vision then for the next decade or two? And what are the major trends, drivers, catalysts that you think support this business model going forward?
So I think as we look forward in our region, we're most excited by the significant entrepreneurial activity that we're now seeing in sort of climate tech, clean tech, green tech. And that's maybe true globally because of the kind of crisis that the planet is in now. But I think there's a fundamental story for Africa here that sometimes gets confused. What we see as an opportunity to kind of flip the narrative on Africa in relation to global warming. So the story is, Africa has not contributed anything to greenhouse gas emissions and to a warming planet, and yet will suffer disproportionately. Those actually happens to be true. But what that then puts Africa in this sort of victim, let's think about a loss and damage fund to help, Africa cope with the warming climate. What it misses is that Africa's rapid growth, the natural assets, Africa is 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. 50% of the babies born on the planet between now and 2050 are going to be born in Africa. And you've got an opportunity, I think, to align the economic interests of this rapidly growing population with planet-positive technologies to alter the development trajectory of the continent. So we see an opportunity to do cities differently. That means electric transportation. That's like Basigo, the electric bus company, is doing already in Nairobi. Smart logistics, waste management. We see an opportunity to do agriculture differently. And then we see an opportunity to leverage the development of carbon markets to recognize and monetize the value of Africa's natural asset, which maybe open up new possible business models and so on. So those are the areas that we're going to be deploying capital into as a thesis later on this year.
Yeah, a lot of the same conversations I'm having here in Asia. And that's actually where I started this podcast about 6-7 years ago. Is there wasn't much discussion around what was actually happening here. There was a lot of assumptions being made from very afar about what was going on here, what the challenges were, and who was involved, and how they could save the day. The challenges are here already, but a lot of the innovations are coming out of that. They know their market, they know the challenge, it's personal for them, and they want to drive through. And yeah, they don't have to necessarily build the greatest new and most innovative technology. They can take things that have been proven, create the new business model, or leapfrog the technology one more layer for their own applications. Then the question comes like, where's the money coming from, and what are the legal systems and the governance structures that are allowed in each of these countries, because they tend to be a little bit behind on that area. But this is where the solutions are needed. And they won't always be exported into these regions. They will be largely developed in these regions and come to scale. And I think it just provides so much energy around the ecosystem.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And look, let's be honest. If Africa tries to follow the growth path that we all followed in the global north, we're definitely cooked. We're all done. We need Africa to show us how it's done, right? Because with that kind of growth, I think we see it. I mean, it is a huge threat, right? But that threat, like any good VC, the threat is a huge opportunity. And I think we're seeing we've got companies in our portfolios that are shifting people off of charcoal to bioethanol. Now Cocoa Network's now serving a third of Nairobi households. So there are these innovative solutions that are there that are coming, and I think we're very alive to those and see the opportunities in front of us.
You're talking to an investor who's looking at getting in the game. They have money. They're going to raise money. They have a mission now. What are 2 or 3 pieces of advice you'd give them to position themselves for success?
I think there's an opportunity, even for sophisticated investors, who want to put money directly into companies to leverage funds like Novastar, but there's choice now, to leverage a fund investment with potential co-investment rights if people have the money to put to work in that way. So I always worry a little bit about, and this maybe going back to the impact investing, the lots of well-meaning impact investors who are doing fly-in, fly-out, or they see the pitch and it happens to be someone who's connected in the Valley or someone who's connected or in Boston. And so people, fly in, they see the thing, whatever it is, and they put money to work. And more often than not, that's not a happy outcome. And so I think partnering with people who have boots on the ground, who are kind of living, working in the region, I think is super important. I think the other piece of advice is really try to check your time horizon. You have to be thinking in terms of decades. I say to our investors, the North America Venture Capital Association, so Silicon Valley funds, the data says it takes a venture fund, the median venture fund takes 14 and a half years to exit everything. So is Africa going to be faster than the Silicon Valley at exiting everything? Probably not. So I think it's also kind of coming in with that sense of, okay, I'm doing something really meaningful. I'm going to be deliberate about it. I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to partner with people who have boots on the ground. And then if you're going to do it, then invest what you can bring.
Last question. If you're talking to an entrepreneur who's pitching for money, like trying to align with investors, understand the investors, show they have the capacity, what are 2 or 3 pieces of advice you'd give them?
So first of all, I think to do your homework beforehand. And ideally, you're talking to investors before you need money. Like starting to really understand, because I think you're testing as much for the entrepreneur, frankly, as for the investor, testing for values alignment. You're testing, are you going to be wanting the same thing? Are you going to be both sort of behaving in the way that you would want, you'd want to be treated. I think the second thing is, once you've attracted capital, is to be honest. Like, don't bury bad news. Yeah, to be really transparent and to keep the lines of communication wide open. Because I think if you've done the first check right, you've got good values alignment. Then I think it's really, to get the most out of that, you basically want to have a venture partner in the back seat, and we're not in the front seat, but in the back seat. But actually, for us to be able to be helpful, it's having that level of transparency.